A forgotten workshop floor. That's where you find the real story of ancient economies. For a long time, the idea was that kings controlled everything. Palaces, that history was just top-down commands, royal decrees. But then there was this one workshop, Excavated, and it changed the whole understanding of craft economies. It showed the real power was with the artisans, in the networks they made, the markets that were vibrant, operating far from any throne room. So you start to see the ancient world differently, not a static monument, a living ecosystem, human ingenuity, how a pile of broken tools debunks the myth of total royal control. What secrets of global trade were in microscopic metal shavings? The answers rewrite history from the ground up. What makes an economy resilient, really? The chisel was the first thing they found. It was bronze. And it wasn't in a tomb or a temple, it was just in the dirt in what looked like an ordinary city mound. Atel in southern Egypt. They were clearing what they thought was a residential area. From the late New Kingdom about 3,200 years ago, they were scraping away sediment, expecting pottery, household things. Then the edge of this blade caught the light. It wasn't for farming. It was a specialized shape for fine woodworking, maybe detailed stone carving, and it wasn't alone. As they expanded the trench, the soil changed. It became dense, a gritty, dark layer packed, unlike anything around it. One of the lead researchers wrote in the field report they'd never seen such a concentrated volume of industrial debris outside a palace context. It was less like a floor and more like a carpet of ancient productivity. Every handful of earth had fragments, clay molds, shattered remains of failed metal castings, tiny droplets of spilled copper alloy. Worn-out stone tools for polishing and finishing. This wasn't a part-time hobby in a backyard. The density of the evidence shouted its purpose. This was a primary workshop, a dedicated space where craft was the main event, operating day in, day out. In that single compact layer, they had a time capsule, not of a moment but of a process, a complete microcosm of an entire economic sector, frozen in the act of creation. It promised a direct line into the hands and minds of the artisans themselves, challenging the quiet assumption that their work was always dictated by a distant palace. What could this one room tell us? This single snapshot of busy hands, about the true engine of an ancient city. The old idea about ancient economies was straightforward. It was top-down. The palace was like a headquarters. It owned everything. It controlled the trade. It employed all the skilled workers directly in a kind of state factory system. The artisans were specialists attached to the palace, making only what the elite wanted. The economy was a monolith, one engine, one driver. Then they found the workshop Atel, and the evidence there told a different story. The raw materials, for one thing. The copper and bronze fragments came from many different sources, not from one central palace-controlled stockpile. So the artisans were getting their own metals, maybe from independent traders or from regional markets. And then the objects themselves. There were figurines and amulets in the debris. They had stylistic quirks, small deviations from the official Egyptian art style, a local flavor, a personal touch. They also found small, finely balanced scales, the kind you'd use to weigh tiny amounts of precious metal or medicinal powders, instruments for small-scale, precise transaction. And what wasn't there was telling. No royal seals, no administrative tablets giving orders. Instead, they found tokens, probably used for haggling or for tracking individual accounts. The tool marks on unfinished pieces showed variation, the unique signature of different hands working at their own rhythm, not the uniform output of an assembly line. One of the most compelling finds was a wooden figurine, beautifully carved, high quality, but it depicted a local deity in a style the state temples didn't sanction, and it was found right next to dozens of common, mass-produced items. So this workshop was fulfilling custom orders alongside its standard stock, catering to local tastes, to a local, maybe even a middle-class clientele. This makes you think. If the palace didn't control everything, how did quality stay high? How was the supply kept consistent? The answer is in a decentralized, self-regulating market. Reputation became the currency. An artisan's skill and reliability were their most valuable assets, enforced not by a royal overseer but by the community. A blacksmith who used poor alloys would find no customers. A carpenter whose chairs broke would see his business vanish. This network of independent workshops competing and collaborating created a resilient economic layer. It operated in parallel to the official palace economy, a system built not on command but on trust, on mutual interest, kneeling in the dust, sifting soil through a screen, a slow process, separating earth to find fragments, not gold, slivers of ore. Flecks of a blue stone dust, grains of a clay that doesn't belong here. This is the micro-debris of a workshop, and it holds a map. For a long time, theories about long-distance trade were built on finished things. A statue, a vase, but here in the waste was a continuous record, every failed casting, every spill, every broken tool fragment. They were like receipts for materials that traveled thousands of miles to end up on this floor. Then came the provenance studies. Scientists analyzed the atoms, isotopic analysis. It reads the geochemical signature like a fingerprint pointing to a birthplace. Those bronze fragments in the dust told a story. The copper likely came from Sinai or Cyprus, but the tin signature pointed east, far east, to what's now Afghanistan, and this wasn't a one-time thing, it was a steady supply. In the same sediment they found other traces. Ebony dust from deep in Africa, chips of obsidian. Its nearest source was Anatolia, Turkey. This workshop was a terminus, a hub in a network that connected continents. The implication is, these materials didn't necessarily arrive on royal ships. They came through channels run by and for craftspeople, independent merchants, middlemen, caravan traders, supplying workshops directly, responding to demand for specific materials. And this system showed resilience. In layers from times of political turmoil when the Egyptian state was weak, the workshop debris tells a different story, not collapse, adaptation. The mix of materials shifts, but it never stops. They found evidence of intensive recycling. Old bronzes melted down, broken imported ceramics ground up and used to strengthen local pottery. There was a cache of beautiful foreign pottery shattered. It wasn't thrown away. The pieces were crushed. That powder was kneaded into new clay, giving local pots a sturdier fabric, a subtle, glittering quality from the foreign grit. This is an economy of ingenuity. It paints the ancient artisan not as a simple laborer, but as a savvy networker, managing a complex supply chain, sourcing globally, adapting to shortages, finding value in what others saw as waste. Their workshop was more than a production site. It was a node in a vast informal web of exchange. Humming with activity far from the eyes of any pharaoh, you could walk around the workshop and see the whole social order laid out on the ground. In one corner near a low bench, the soil was finer. The tool fragments there were smaller, precision files, polishing stones worn smooth. That was the master's station, where the final touches happened, where complex pieces got assembled. Just a few steps away, the story changed. The clay molds were cruder there. The castings often came out malformed, with thick seams and bubbles trapped in the metal. Those were the apprentice spaces. Their mistakes preserved in the record, they're not failures. They're lessons, moments of learning fossilized. Archaeologists have a term for this, an operational sequence. By mapping where each type of debris fell, they can reconstruct the choreography of the place. They can identify individual hands, the deep, confident strike of a master's chisel on stone, then the shallower, more hesitant mark of a trainee, later corrected by a firmer, guiding blow. This evidence shows a hierarchy, but it wasn't built on royal decree. It was built on hard-won expertise. At the top was the master, the person who understood the alchemy of alloys, the temperament of the furnace. Then came the journeyman casters, skilled at pouring molten metal into intricate molds. And finally, the laborers. They handled the constant, dirty work, hauling fuel, preparing clay, cleaning the space. The artifacts speak to this community. They found a hammerstone, its handle worn to fit one specific grip, a personal tool used for years. They found a small, failed casting of a lion amulet, an apprentice's work. And right beside it in the clay, the clear impression of an adult thumb pressing the wax model back into shape for another try. A moment of teaching captured. They also found evidence of a shared life beyond the labor, remains of simple meals eaten together. A small, clean space in one corner with a niche in the wall, maybe for a protective household deity. This was more than a workplace. It was a social unit, a guild-like community bound by shared knowledge and mutual dependence. One of the most poignant finds was a small cache, a set of fine bronze tools, a chisel, a drill, a small saw carefully placed in a ceramic jar and buried under the compacted floor near the furnace. This wasn't lost property. Researchers think it could be a ritual deposit, a foundation offering when the workshop was built, or maybe a closing ceremony when a master retired or passed on, a gesture of respect for the tools of the trade and for the knowledge they represented. This moves us from the abstract idea of labor to the texture of individual lives. What did status mean for these ancient technicians? It was likely measured in respect, in the deference shown to their skill, and in their ability to pass that skill to the next generation. Their identity was forged at the furnace and the workbench, inside a community that recognized mastery. Their economic power came from that social capital. A master artisan's reputation was his most valuable possession. It granted him autonomy, influence, and a legacy that lived on in the hands of his apprentices. So the workshop floor isn't just an economic blueprint, it's a map of a society, written not in laws but in the subtle geography of skill and mentorship and shared purpose. The greatest innovations don't usually start with some official order. They start with someone cursing a broken tool. For a long time, the story of ancient technology was told as a top-down thing. A king wants a big project, so state-sponsored minds come up with new methods. But the workshop floor at Atel tells a different story, a quieter one. Here, innovation was daily, pragmatic. It came from needing to save fuel, to prevent waste, to handle a tricky customer request, or just to make the work less hard on the back. Scattered in the ordinary debris were ghosts of experiments, a small pile of misshapen glass ingots, bubbled, colors murky and uneven. That wasn't trash. Those were trials. Someone was refining a recipe, trying for a clearer blue, a more vibrant red, testing different sands, different mineral additives. In another layer, they found a series of small, cracked metal discs, each one a slightly different blend of copper and tin, test pieces for a new alloy, looking for the perfect balance, hard enough for carving but still malleable for shaping. This space was a research lab. The driving force wasn't royal ambition, it was the pressure of efficiency. A clear example came from the workshop's own crucibles, the clay pots for melting metal. In the earliest layers they were simple, bowl-shaped, but in later layers the design changed. The rim tapered inward, a slight lip. That wasn't for looks. That small change would have improved heating efficiency, concentrated the heat, reduced fuel consumption, a grassroots upgrade. Perfected through trial and error, right there on the floor. Complex techniques spread through these networks. Take lost wax casting, a method for making intricate hollow metal sculptures. You see the full glory of it in temple art, but the evidence suggests it was perfected in places like this first. They found the fragile fired clay investment molds, the negative space left after the wax melted away. These were for smaller items, elaborate amulet cases, detailed figurine parts. The artisans here were mastering the technique for a local market, working out the kinks long before it was scaled up for a king. Even the tools evolved in response to need. The excavation showed a sequence of hammerstones and chisels. The earliest ones were general purpose. Later, specialized forms appeared. A chisel with a uniquely angled edge, perfect for undercutting in wood carving. A polishing stone with a groove worn into its center, shaped by years of smoothing a specific type of jewelry wire. This was tool evolution in real time. Adaptation for the task. Maybe the most eloquent artifact wasn't a tool at all. It was an improvised solution. In one corner, they uncovered a large flat stone being used as an anvil. On closer look, it wasn't just any stone. It was a fragment of a much larger millstone, a heavy basalt grinding wheel that had cracked in half. Instead of throwing it out, someone hauled the piece in, turned it over, used its perfectly smooth, worn surface as a sturdy base for hammering, problem-solving with what was at hand. A brilliant reuse of a broken thing. This collective intelligence of everyday practitioners changes the story. Progress wasn't a lightning bolt from an ivory tower. It was the slow, steady buildup of small insights, a better grip here, a fuel-saving tweak there, a clever reuse over there. Each innovation was a shared victory, passed from master to apprentice, traded between workshops as a professional secret. The real engine was this humming, decentralized network of tinkerers. Their names are lost, but their practical genius is stamped into the clay and metal they left behind. Their legacy is a reminder. The most transformative shifts often rise from the ground up. From the hands of those solving today's problem with yesterday's tools, the calendar of the workshop floor is written in pollen and dust. To read its rhythm, you look at the microscopic world trapped in its packed layers. Environmental archaeologists sift that fine sediment. They read it like tree rings. Each thin stratum is a season. And the story they tell is that this hub wasn't a constant, year-round factory. It pulsed. Its heartbeat was synchronized with the sun and the harvest and the wind. One distinct layer, they found a dense concentration of pollen from acacia trees. This wasn't random drift. Acacia sap was a key ingredient in ancient adhesives for binding inlay work. The pollen peak means spring when the sap would have been harvested, and that same layer is filled with tiny chips of precious stone, turquoise and carnelian, materials for intricate jewelry. So the workshop was humming with delicate, high-value craft precisely when the natural resources for that craft were fresh. Other layers tell of different tempos. In strata from late summer and early autumn, the character of the debris changes. The sheer volume of output increases dramatically. They find molds for simple, mass-produced items, copper, standard-weight rings, common amulets. This was peak production season. It aligns perfectly with the harvest. After the crops were in, the agricultural surplus was converted into wealth. Farmers had grain to trade. Communities had a little extra for a new tool or a piece of jewelry. The workshop shifted gears to meet that surge, churning out affordable goods for a newly flush populace. Then comes the quiet. In what would have been the deep winter months, the evidence of active metal casting dwindles almost to nothing. Instead, they find different activities. Concentrations of finely ground sandstone thus point to intensive tool maintenance. Every chisel and saw was being sharpened and repaired. They also found caches of raw materials. Ingots of copper, lumps of tin, stored in ceramic jars set into the floor. This was the off-season, a time for preparation, not production. A perfect illustration of this rhythm was a pile of nearly identical, finely carved stone weights, dozens of them. Analysis showed they were standardized for weighting fishing nets, and they were all found in a winter layer. This makes profound sense. When winter storms made Mediterranean trade routes treacherous, large-scale maritime commerce slowed. But local fishermen would have been mending and preparing their nets for the coming season. The workshop, in its downtime, pivoted to serve this hyperlocal, practical need. It was an economy of niches, filling the gaps in the annual cycle. This reveals a world far more fluid than our old image of specialized, full-time artisans. It suggests many of these skilled individuals likely balanced multiple roles. A might also tend a family plot. A carpenter could join a harvest crew. Their craft wasn't a separate, industrialized profession. It was woven into the fabric of communal life, expanding and contracting with the natural and agricultural world. The genius of this system was its resilience. It wasn't a brittle machine that stalled without constant fuel. It was an organic ecosystem. It had seasons of intense abundance and necessary periods of rest and repair. The workshop's calendar, written in pollen and tool dust, shows an ancient truth. Their prosperity wasn't about constant growth. It was about intelligent rhythm, about synchronizing human ingenuity with the timeless pulse of the earth. The signature was never a name, it was a flaw. A consistent, tiny imperfection in the casting, a faint seam line on every brooch they ever made, and in the workshop debris, that wasn't a mark of poor quality, it was a fingerprint, a brand. This sixth thing from the floor, it's about specialization. The birth of identity in the marketplace, moving from an anonymous commodity to a world where reputation was everything. Archaeologists sorting through thousands of metal fragments, they began to see a pattern. Certain objects appeared in overwhelming numbers, and they were nearly identical. Take the fibula, a decorative safety pin for cloaks. This workshop wasn't making a little of everything. It was churning out one specific style, an arch shape with a catch plate decorated with a simple spiral. The consistency was remarkable. Dozens, then hundreds of these brooches in various stages of completion. This wasn't general metalwork. This was a factory for a single, signature product. Economic anthropologists note this. This kind of intense specialization, it's a hallmark of a sophisticated craft economy. It fosters trust. An ancient shopper in a busy market, they wouldn't be buying a random fibula. They'd be seeking out the spiral catch brooch from that workshop near the west gate, because they knew it wouldn't break. The clasp was always smooth. The craftsperson became the brand. Their consistent output, right down to its minor, recognizable quirks, that was their advertisement. It let a single workshop dominate a niche, build a loyal clientele that stretched beyond their city. You can see this pursuit of a perfect style in the trial pieces. Small lumps of clay, each one pinched and shaped with the same spiral motif. These weren't for sale. They were experiments, practice runs. The artisan was working out the exact depth of the impression, the sharpness of the line until it was just right, refining their visual language, the thing that would set their work apart. One of the most powerful finds was a single stone mold for casting amulets. It showed a life of its own. The central cavity for the goddess was worn smooth from decades of use, but the edges of the mold were chipped, repaired over and over with fresh clay. Someone cared for this object. They maintained its utility for a generation, producing hundreds of nearly identical figurines. Each one carried not just the image of a deity, but the enduring stamp of that workshop's commitment to a specific product. This specialization created a web. The who excelled at needed partners. They relied on a specific potter who made the perfect, heat-resistant clay for their crucibles. They might depend on a particular trader who could supply the right grade of tin. The workshop wasn't an island. It was a node in a network of other specialists, each one trusting the other's branded quality. A collapse in one link, a potter who changed his clay recipe, a trader who brought impure metal that could ruin the reputation of their fates were intertwined. So in an economy without mass media or logos, how did this brand identity function? It lived in collective memory, in the stories passed between customers, in the tangible proof of an object that lasted. A reputation was built transaction by transaction over years. It was a form of social currency, more valuable than any single coin. To lose it meant economic oblivion. It transforms the view. The ancient marketplace wasn't a faceless bazaar. It was a community of known quantities. Where the hand of the maker was the ultimate guarantee, the evidence is just overwhelming. This wasn't some small craft shop. It was a proto-factory. That romantic image of a lone artisan making one special thing, it falls apart when you see the site. They didn't find a handful of broken molds. They found hundreds, all for the same objects. And the debris layer wasn't just a few inches. In some spots, it was over a meter deep. Just a packed-down mass of industrial waste. The sheer weight of the slag, the broken pieces from thousands of failed castings, these huge piles of fuel ash, it all points to an operation on a totally different scale. To grasp what that volume meant, they tried to recreate it. They built a replica of the main furnace, using the right materials from the period, and they timed it all. How long to reach melting temperature, how much charcoal it burned every hour, how many molds you could fire at once. They worked out the output capacity. The numbers were surprising. Even conservative estimates say this one workshop could have made tens of thousands of metal items in a generation. Enough to supply its whole city, and then some, enough to become a wholesaler for a region. That kind of scale required a new organization. It wasn't just about skill then, it was about logistics. You needed a constant, huge inflow of materials all coordinated, tons of copper and tin, cartloads of charcoal, sacks of high-quality clay for the molds, and then the labor. This wasn't a master with a couple apprentices. The layout of the space shows that. They've found distinct zones, a staging area for raw materials near the entrance, a dedicated spot for preparing clay with mixing pits, a cluster of workbenches for making molds, all set up for good light, then the furnace area itself, with clear spaces for the people handling the crucibles and doing the pouring. Finally, stations for finishing and checking quality. This is a layout designed for flow, for moving partly finished items from one specialist to the next, like an ancient assembly line. The most telling part might be the kiln. They found a large, fixed structure built from fire brick. Its capacity was enormous, far beyond what any single household or small guild would ever need for themselves. This kiln was built for bulk firing, to cure hundreds of clay molds at once, getting ready for a big casting session. It represents a serious capital investment. Someone was planning for long-term, high-volume production. This was manufacturing with an eye on external markets, on export. Handling the waste from all this was its own challenge. They found specific dump pits filled only with slag and casting sprues. Other areas collected ash and charcoal dust to be reused in the clay. Nothing was left to clutter the working space. The efficiency is almost tangible. That level of coordination points to managerial skill. Maybe the master artisan became a foreman, an operations manager. Coordinating suppliers, scheduling production runs, overseeing quality, managing a sizable workforce. It forces a real reconsideration. The line between ancient craft and early industry gets beautifully blurred. We're not looking at the forerunner of a medieval guild workshop. We're looking at the precursor to an industrial plant. It shows an economic complexity we don't usually give this period credit for. A system capable of standardized mass production, driven not by a pharaoh's command, but by what the market wanted. It was a system sophisticated enough to produce at scale, and then it needed a network just as sophisticated to distribute everything it made. The most radical thing from the floor wasn't what they made. It was what they kept. They didn't throw anything away. Modern ideas talk about a circular economy. This workshop just did it. It was a daily necessity. Every fragment had potential. Every scrap had value. Raw copper came from thousands of miles away, so waste wasn't an option. It was a resource waiting. They found the proof in a pit just outside the work area. It wasn't a trash heap. It was more like a holding cell for future materials. Inside were broken bronze tools bent beyond use. The sprues and runners from castings, the extra metal from the molds, pieces of shattered crucibles, even worn-out grinding stones. Nothing here was going to the dump. This was the workshop's recycling bin, a curated collection, materials for tomorrow. Scientists gave the definitive evidence. They used spectrometry on finished bronze objects from the site. The metal wasn't pure, it was a palimpsest, a layered history. The alloy signatures showed the metal had been melted down and realloyed many times over. A chisel might contain traces of a centuries-old statuette mixed with a broken spear point from a generation before. Each melting was a renewal. The metal carried its own genealogy, a memory of its past forms. This recovery was an economic activity itself. They found small clay basins set into the floor near workbenches. Under a microscope, the purpose was clear. They were lined with a sticky residue of clay and grease. These were dust traps. As artisans filed and polished precious metals, gold leaf, silver for inlay, the precious dust would settle. Later it would be collected. The grease burned away, leaving behind tiny granules of pure metal. Nothing escaped. Even ceramics were part of the cycle. They didn't just use new clay. In the pottery debris, analysts found grog, crushed fragments of old fired pottery mixed into the new clay as temper. This wasn't just for texture. It was a reuse of a durable material. The old shards gave the new vessels strength, reduced the chance of cracking during firing. A broken pot became the backbone of a new one. Perhaps the most telling artifact was a large, flat limestone slab near the furnace. It wasn't a tool. Its surface was covered in a grid of shallow pecked depressions in neat rows. Researchers think this was a physical ledger, a tally stone. Each depression might have represented a specific weight or type of scrap bronze delivered. A merchant brings in a sack of old fittings. The foreman makes a mark. It's an account kept in stone, proof that scrap had a standardized, tracked value. This shows an economic logic born from scarcity and ingenuity. In their world, materials were never truly consumed. They were transformed, then captured and transformed again. The workshop wasn't just a point of production. It was a nexus in a continuous loop. Sustainability wasn't a choice. It was the core operating principle. A system where every flake of metal, every splinter, every particle of dust was seen not as waste but as potential capital. It forces a reflection. Their drive for efficiency, forged in necessity, created a model of resource use. Our own throwaway culture is only now, later, struggling to relearn it. It wasn't always the finished brooch that got exported. Sometimes it was the knowledge of how to make one. That's the ninth thing the floor tells us about invisible assets, the trade in skill itself. Picture a master craftsperson from this place, their leather roll of tools over a shoulder. They aren't carrying goods for sale. They are the commodity. Their mind, their trained hands, their proprietary techniques, those were the ultimate luxury exports, moving quietly along the same routes as copper and tin. Diffusion studies track this. Archaeologists noticed a very specific decorative motif, a spiral pattern with a tiny dot at the center, stamped into metal or pressed into clay. It shows up first here on this workshop signature. Then decades later, that exact same motif appears on belt buckles in a coastal city 300 miles north. A century after that, it's on ceremonial bowls in a tomb far to the east. It's not the object that traveled, it's the mental template, the idea. The knowledge of how to create that specific visual signature had been carried, person by person, across generations. The transfer of technical knowledge is even clearer. Take a unique riveting technique they identified here. Instead of hammering a metal pin over, these artisans developed a method of cold forging the end into a perfectly smooth, rounded cap. It required a specific anvil with a hemispherical dent and a precise striking force. Years after this workshop's peak, that identical riveting method is found on the bronze fittings of a trading vessel that sank off the coast of Anatolia. The ship wasn't built here, but someone who learned that skill here very likely was. They had traveled, taking their expertise to a new port. This movement challenges the old model of trade being only about objects in a ship's hold. It suggests skilled individuals, these task specialists, were perhaps as mobile as their goods. They acted as living vectors for technological transfer. A master bronze caster might be invited to a distant city-state to establish a new workshop, bringing his entire operational sequence with him. His compensation wasn't just in silver. It was in status, in a guaranteed supply of materials, in the right to train a new lineage of apprentices. Evidence for this comes from the training pieces themselves. Dozens of nearly identical simple practice castings, small ingots, basic rings. The consistency is remarkable. That points to a formalized apprenticeship system. A master wasn't just showing a technique. They were enforcing a standard, replicating their own skill, creating a clone of their knowledge that could, in time, travel independently. An apprentice who mastered the spiraling dot motif here could take that skill anywhere, becoming a walking advertisement for their home workshop style. How were these ideas protected if they were so valuable? Not with patents, but with social codes. A master's proprietary alloy recipe or his secret method for achieving a lustrous polish would be closely guarded, shared only with a trusted successor, often within a family line. That created guild-like structures built on secrecy and loyalty. The knowledge itself became a form of inherited wealth, more secure than any vault. So the workshop's influence radiated outward in two waves. The first wave was physical, the flood of spiral catch brooches and standard weight rings into regional markets. The second wave was far more enduring and subtle. It was the wave of technique, the riveting method, the motif, the efficient furnace design. These intangible exports seeded innovation elsewhere. They created a shared technical language across vast distances, linking craftspeople in a silent, professional fellowship. The most lasting legacy of this busy floor wasn't the pile of objects it produced. It was the scattering of knowing how, carried in the minds and hands of those who walked out of its doorway and into the wider world. The final object was never finished. They found a bronze sword blade on the workshop floor, beautifully cast, polished, but the hilt was missing, and right beside it a lump of beeswax, shaped by fingers into a rough grip, a prototype. A conversation between maker and client frozen there. The 10th thing we learn from this space is that the consumer's voice was heard here. The client was king in this economy. We can see the scene. A local official, maybe a merchant, steps into the workshop. The air smells of hot metal and clay. He negotiates not for a sword, but for his sword. He describes the balance, the feel in the hand. The craftsperson listens, takes that beeswax and shapes it right there until the client nods. That wax model would be used to cast the perfect, personalized hilt. That interaction, that bespoke service, is written into the debris. The evidence for customization is subtle. It exists alongside piles of mass-produced brooches. Researchers found scraps of bronze and bone, covered in trial engravings. Faint lines, practice curves, unique symbols. These weren't production mistakes. They were samples, a craftsperson testing a design, showing options before committing to the final piece. They also found one-of-a-kind molds, intricate clay forms used one time and then discarded. The economic logic is clear. Someone paid for that exclusivity. Even standardized objects were modified after purchase. A common bronze lamp from the site had its base inscribed with a family symbol, a tiny, stylized bird. The engraving tool marks are distinct from the original casting seams. This was added later, a personal touch on a generic product. Archaeologists note this variation within a product line is a classic sign of market testing. The workshop wasn't just pushing out inventory. It was adapting its output, tweaking designs based on what sold and what was requested. The tools of direct commerce were here, too. Those finely balanced scales and sets of standardized stone weights. They weren't just for measuring raw materials from suppliers. They were for the final transaction, for weighing out flakes of gold for inlay work or portioning silver for payment. They enabled the sale of skill and customization by the gram. A powerful example was a cache of rings. The hoops varied dramatically. Some were tiny for a slender finger. Others were broad and heavy. This wasn't a batch for resale to a wholesaler. This was a collection made to order for specific individuals. This places desire at the heart of the ancient craft economy. It reflects a level of ancient individualism we don't always acknowledge. People weren't just passive recipients. They were active participants, expressing identity through customized possessions. A sword with a unique hilt said something about its owner's style. A lamp with a family crest turned an object into a statement of lineage. The workshop floor becomes a record of dialogues, not just between master and apprentice, but between maker and buyer. Each customized piece, each altered fitting, each unique mold represents a negotiation, a meeting of practical skill and personal vision. It reveals an economic system that was dynamic, flexible, human-centered. The customer's wish, preserved in wax and metal, shaped history as surely as any royal decree. They found a small altar in a corner of the workshop. Just a flat stone slab on two rocks. The surface was stained dark, but not from metal. The residue was plant resins and beeswax. Incense, so it wasn't a bench, it was a shrine right there on the floor. The factory and the temple, they weren't separate spaces. Archaeologists see this as central. For these artisans, success wasn't just about skill or good materials. It was a gift, a favor. The act of making something was participating in a cosmic order. To turn earth and ore into a beautiful object was a kind of magic, so you'd seek a blessing for it. We can piece the rituals together from what they left. The clearest clue is the foundation deposit. Before the first furnace brick was laid, someone placed a set of perfect tools into a pit, a master's chisel, an engraving needle, a small hammer, arranged carefully, then covered over. That was an offering, a pact, a request for the deities to inhabit the work, to guide the hands that would use the tools that came after. Certain stages probably had their own rites. Firing the kiln was risky. Weeks of work could shatter. That might have called for a small offering first. They may have consulted lunar cycles, chosen an auspicious day for a major casting. The materials themselves could be prepared. Clay for molds mixed with water from a sacred spring. Metals purified not just by fire, but with spoken charms. The artifacts tell this blended story. There's one stone mold. On one side, the cavity is for a standard market weight, a disc. On the reverse side of the same stone, carved with the same care, is the form for a tiny figurine. The household god Bess, protector of the home, the same hands, the same block of stone, producing the utterly practical and the deeply sacred. They were two sides of the same coin. This reveals a worldview, no hard separation between the spiritual and the commercial. Making an amulet was a pious act and a product. Crafting a ceremonial vessel was a religious commission and a source of income. The workshop's prosperity was tied to the perceived power of its items, and to the favor it curried with the gods. A known for effective protective amulets would see demand for all his goods rise, because his skill was seen as divinely endorsed. It makes you think about the nature of their work. For them, labor was never just a job. It was a vocation, a calling tied to identity and community and cosmology. The incense smoke from that small altar was as essential as the charcoal smoke from the furnace. It was an acknowledgement. Their human ingenuity was part of a larger collaboration. Their economic resilience was rooted not just in smart networks or efficient recycling, but in a profound sense of purpose. They worked in a world alive with meaning, where every strike of the hammer echoed in the market and in the heavens. The floor tells you it was a bad year. There's a layer about 2 fingers thick that's different, darker, grittier. It has more charcoal than usual and a fine ash, a uniform ash that doesn't come from the furnace. It's the kind of ash that falls from the sky, from a distant fire, and in this layer the rhythm of the place just breaks. A crucible was left half full of hardened metal, still sitting on the furnace edge. Tools were dropped, not stored. It speaks of a sudden stop, an interruption that felt permanent. This is the archaeology of crisis. It captures a moment when the larger systems this workshop depended on, the long trade routes, the agricultural surplus, the political stability, all of it shuddered. Maybe a conflict disrupted the caravan paths. Or a poor harvest meant people had no grain to trade for bronze brooches. And the workshop's response is written in the debris. Imported materials like that distinctive Afghan tin, they vanish from this layer. Instead, the artisans used what they could find. They turned to local copper ores, inferior ores that produced a brittle, porous metal. The failed castings from this period are heartbreaking. Malformed, cracked, full of impurities. But they didn't stop working. They adapted. The product line shifted. Gone are the decorative, the fine amulets. The debris is dominated by two things now: repair and utility. They made simple rivets and patches. They produced basic knife blades, heavy needles. They were fixing things, not making luxury, survival goods. There's one poignant find from this crisis layer: a pile of small, irregular metal discs, each one a different size, crudely cut from larger, broken objects. These weren't coins, they were hack metal, a form of emergency currency. When official systems falter, people create their own mediums of exchange. These rough discs represent a grassroots economic response, a way to keep local trade moving when the larger monetary system seized up, and the rate of recycling skyrockets. In this dark stratum, they found almost no fresh metal at all. Every artifact is made from remelted older objects. The analysis shows a frantic blending. A single ingot might contain traces of a ceremonial bowl, a farming tool, and a piece of jewelry. Everything was thrown back into the crucible. Value was being extracted from the very bones of the community's past wealth. Perhaps the most telling adaptation is the emergence of local imitations. With imported luxury stones like lapis lazuli unavailable, the artisans got creative. They began producing beads and inlays from glazed clay, painted a convincing deep blue. They used locally abundant shells, carved and polished to mimic more exotic materials. These weren't cheap knockoffs meant to deceive. They were statements of resilience, a declaration that beauty and craft would continue even if the ingredients had to change. This layer transforms the workshop. It becomes a barometer. Its floor becomes a sensitive instrument, recording the economic health of the entire region. The crisis didn't destroy it. It revealed the workshop's hidden strengths. Its resilience was built on that deep, ingrained flexibility, the multi-skilled workforce, the knowledge of local alternatives, the ingrained culture of recycling, the tight-knit social network that could coordinate a rapid pivot. When the palace economy might have faltered under such shocks, this decentralized network system showed its durability. It could contract, simplify, and localize almost overnight. It didn't need a royal decree to switch from brooches to knife blades. It needed the collective memory of its artisans, their stored knowledge of every material and technique, and their shared will to persevere. The crisis layer isn't a story of defeat. It's a manual for survival, written in ash and adapted metal. The smallest fingerprints were left in the clay, preserved in the wax of a mold before it was fired. For a long time, the image we've had is the male artisan, the burly smith, the solitary carpenter. But these fingerprints and other clues from the workshop, they dismantle that idea. They point to a more diverse workforce, a story of ancient craft that's more inclusive. Figuring out gendered labor from archaeology is complicated. You can't just look at a tool and say it belonged to a man or a woman. Researchers look for patterns, for correlations, for what burials tell us. They piece together a social fabric from fragments. Inside the workshop, the space was subdivided. One area around the main furnace and anvil was dense with heavy hammerstones and slag. Another zone had a low-plastered bench and better light. There they found a different set of things, not metal debris. They found fine bone needles, small polished stone weights, the kind used on looms to tension threads, delicate awls perfect for piercing leather or fine basketry. This was a textile and leatherworking station right inside the metal workshop. In many ancient societies, textile production was an arena of high female skill. Its presence here, in a professional workshop, is a strong indicator. This wasn't a male-only space. Then there were the artifacts of daily life mixed in with the tools. In a corner near this lighterwork area, they found a small, smooth stone amulet of the household goddess, a protector of women and children, and beside it a simple ceramic rattle, a child's toy. These objects don't mean a lack of professionalism. They paint a picture of a workspace that accommodated family life, that skilled craftwork and could coexist, that the workshop was part of a community's rhythm, not separate from it. The most compelling evidence came from a burial associated with the workshop. The individual was buried with a set of fine bronze engraving tools, chisels, a drill, a burnisher, the signature kit of a master craftsperson working in precious metals, but they were also buried with a strand of faience beads and a cosmetic palette, items traditionally found in burials of women from that period. This combination challenges our categories. It suggests high-skill metalworking wasn't an exclusively male pursuit. This person was likely recognized for their technical artistry and their social identity. Gender archaeologists warn against simple equations. A spindle whorl doesn't automatically mean a woman's hand. A hammer doesn't unequivocally mean a man. The patterns are cultural, not biological. What the evidence from this workshop asks is for a shift in perspective, to reconstruct the social fabric of craft with wider eyes, to see the space as one possibly occupied by mothers and fathers, by sisters and brothers, all contributing different expertise to a collective enterprise. Material world of antiquity, its jewelry, its tools, its textiles was built by a tapestry of hands. To assume they were all male erases a fundamental part of the story. It's in these quiet fingerprints and in the integrated nature of the work itself that we find a more complete picture, a more human picture of who truly shaped the ancient economy. They found the box of clay tokens in a niche by the main furnace. Not hidden, just placed there. Spheres, cones, tiny discs, they look like toys. But to someone who studies early administration, these are spreadsheets. This is a non-literary accounting system. Before writing was for lists, before coinage, these small shapes tracked the life of the workshop. Each form was a mnemonic device, a physical symbol the community agreed on. A cone could be a measure of grain for a laborer. A sphere might be a finished brooch. A disc with a cross cut into it could mean a day of work from the master smith. They were records of production, of debt, of promises. The sophistication is in the context. The tokens weren't scattered. Specific shapes were found with specific debris. Conical tokens were in the area where raw copper ingots were stored. Discs were near the finishing benches where goods were inspected. That spatial association is critical. It suggests when a shipment of metal arrived, a number of cones were put in a jar as a receipt. When a batch of goods passed inspection, a corresponding number of discs were set aside for inventory. Then there was the sealed bulla, a hollow clay ball about the size of a walnut. Inside they could feel the loose rattle of tokens. The outside was stamped with two distinct seal impressions. This object is a contract fossilized in clay. Imagine the transaction. A merchant delivers 10 ingots of tin. The foreman counts them, places 10 tokens, maybe tetrahedrons, into a lump of wet clay. He presses his seal into it. The merchant adds his seal. The clay hardens. The bulla is now a binding receipt, a record of the debt. When the workshop pays for that tin, perhaps with finished goods, the bulla is broken open in the merchant's presence, the tokens retrieved, and the obligation is cleared. It's a system of trust made physical. This reveals an entire economic layer operating on credit, long before standardized money. Value wasn't just in a piece of silver. It was in the promise inside those sealed tokens. It was in the reputation of the seals pressed into the clay. The workshop's economy was a web of these deferred exchanges. A laborer might get tokens for his workday, which he could later exchange at a grain merchant who trusted the workshop's credit. That merchant might then use those tokens to commission new tools. It makes you question the nature of ancient value. We think of coins as the ultimate innovation, bringing uniformity. But this token system shows a vibrant economy could thrive on mutual trust and community consensus. The value wasn't in the clay token, which was nearly worthless. The value was in the shared understanding of what it represented, and in the community's commitment to honor that understanding. This was an economy built not on precious metal, but on social capital. The most important ledger wasn't written down. It was kept in the collective memory of the craftspeople, their suppliers, their clients, with these small baked clay tokens as their quiet guides, the animal bones scattered around there not from sacrifices. They're from meals, lamb chops, fish, eaten right there over the workbench. And mixed in with all that bronze slag and clay dust, they found these small polished stones, with lines cut into them, dice, gaming pieces. And in one corner, a low bench built against the wall, plastered, worn smooth from use. So it wasn't just a lunch break. This was the heart of the community. The workshop was a social nexus, where work and leisure and community life, they all blurred together. Social archaeology sees a space like this as critical. The daily grind of production was tied to the work of social bonding. While hands were busy filing metal or kneading clay, news got exchanged. Gossip from the market, reports from a cousin who traveled upriver. A trader might mention a new source of high-quality tin he'd heard about, some distant port. A visiting artisan could show a clever way to secure a difficult joint. Technological tips, market prices, political rumors, all of it flowed as freely as wine from a shared jug. That informal network was a priceless asset, a living database no palace archive could ever replicate. And this constant exchange, it likely gave the workshop a role in informal governance. Disputes between artisans over materials or client poaching might get hashed out right there, mediated by respected elders of the craft. Plans for communal projects like repairing a neighborhood well or contributing to a festival could be organized over a shared meal. The workshop became a fact town hall for its economic sector, where the rules of the trade were reinforced not by law but by peer pressure. By collective interest. The evidence for this wider web of connection is in the small foreign objects. A beautifully carved seal from Syria, found not in a treasury but nestled in the corner of the seating area. A fragment of Aegean pottery used as a makeshift dish. These weren't imports for resale. They were souvenirs, gifts, personal possessions left behind by visiting traders and craftspeople who used the workshop as a base. It was a destination, a trusted node in a human network. A single potsherd makes this tangible, an ostraca. On one side, someone had sketched not a design but a rough map, a winding line for a river, dots for settlements, a distinctive mountain shape. Was it directions for a trader, a memory of a homeland shared over a cup, or a message to be sent with the next caravan? This simple sketch transforms the space. It was a communications hub, where the local and the global met amid the smell of charcoal and cooked food. Seeing the workshop this way changes everything. It stops being merely an economic unit, a proto-factory. It becomes a social institution. The true product of this space wasn't just bronze or stone weights. It was community itself. It was trust, the shared identity and mutual support that made the entire craft economy resilient. This forces a shift in perspective. We can't view ancient economies as abstract systems of supply and demand anymore. They were embedded in the daily rhythms of human connection, in the stories told over a game of dice, in the alliances forged over a shared supper. The economy lived and breathed in these spaces, powered as much by conversation and camaraderie as by copper and fire. The soil remembers, even the smoke. To see the workshop's real footprint, you look past its walls. To where trees aren't anymore, to the stream that moved, to the earth itself holding a chemical record of what happened there. This is about environmental impact, how one craft hub, over generations, actively shaped the land around it. Drill down, they take core samples from the floodplain not far from the site. In these thin columns of mud they find a timeline, and at the depths that match the workshop's peak centuries the sediment changes. It gets darker, greasy with charcoal, and the analysis shows higher levels of copper, lead, tin. This isn't natural, it's pollution, ancient but clear, a faint metallic mark, washed from the workshop floor, carried by runoff, settled in the riverbed. The industry left a permanent line in the geology. The demand for fuel was huge. One furnace running every day could use a small forest over a generation. Pollen records from those soil cores tell it. They show a sharp drop in tree species like oak and pine, trees valued for their high-heat charcoal. That pollen vanishes. Replaced by grasses and shrubs, the landscape was being cleared. But then a shift. The pollen record shows fast-growing species coming back. Willow, poplar, trees you can coppice, cut back to stumps so they regrow quickly in cycles. This is probably evidence of a sustainability practice, born from necessity. The artisans or the people managing the woods learned they couldn't just take, they had to manage. They worked out a rotational system, an ancient kind of renewable energy plan to keep the fires going. You see the resource footprint on the ground. The workshop's location wasn't random. It was strategic, at a nexus, close to water needed for clay and cooling, but also near outcrops of good clay for molds and crucibles. Just outside the settlement, they found the scars of clay pits, big depressions that later filled with trash, becoming their own time capsules, and it was placed near a natural trail that led to trade routes. Every choice was about lowering the energy cost of moving heavy things. The relationship with water was complicated. The workshop needed it but changed it. The clearest sign came from studying a small seasonal stream that used to run nearby. In layers from the workshop's time, the stream's sediment is thick with fine, silty clay. This is runoff from constant clay washing from slurry disposal. Over decades, this silt built up. It changed how the stream flowed, made it shallower, more likely to flood the area in the wet season. And the evidence suggests this feedback loop eventually forced a move. Later phases of the workshop are on slightly higher ground. They had altered their own microenvironment so much they had to adapt. It paints a picture. The ancient craft economy wasn't a closed system, separate from nature. It was an open loop, drawing materials in, sending waste out, an agent of environmental change. The artisans weren't just shaping metal and clay, they were shaping forests, waterways, soil chemistry. Their prosperity was tied directly to how they managed the ecology around them. Their story adds a dimension. It shows that questions of sustainability, balancing human need against environmental limits, aren't modern ideas. They're ancient, practical concerns, written not on scrolls but in the quiet, layered record of pollen, sediment, and the trees that are gone. A chisel is never just a chisel. Its shape is a decision. It's a solution to a problem someone faced 100 years earlier. If you lay out the tools from a workshop floor in sequence, by the layer of earth they came from, you stop seeing objects. You start seeing a conversation across time. A slow, deliberate argument between hand and material, written in bronze and stone. That's the 17th revelation from the floor, the legacy in the tools themselves. Their typology, the study of their forms, becomes a map of technological lineage. Archaeologists who specialize in ancient tools, the lithic and metallurgical analyst, they approach them like biographies. Each hammerstone, each awl, has a life history. It begins with its manufacture. The choice of stone, the way it was knapped or ground to its initial form. Then comes its use. That's written in the polish. The microscopic wear patterns along its edge. A chisel used on soft wood develops a different sheen than one used on limestone. The striations, the tiny fractures, they tell you the angle of attack, the force applied, even whether the user was right or left-handed. Then maybe comes repair. Resharpening flakes knocked off a blade edge. A new haft fitted to replace a broken handle. Finally, discard. But here in this workshop, discard was rare. More often, it was transformation. A worn-out hammerstone becoming a polishing pebble. A broken bronze adze being melted down, its form ending so its material could live again. By charting these subtle changes in form across the layers, a story of cumulative improvement emerges. In the earliest strata, the hammerstones are generalists, rounded river cobbles fit for many tasks, but in later layers, specialization appears. A hammer with a narrow, pecked striking face for delicate metalwork, another with a broad, flat surface for crushing ore. The tools evolved to match the evolving division of labor within the workshop itself. The most eloquent changes are often the smallest. A sequence of bronze drills tells a clear tale. The earliest ones have simple, tapered points. Later, a craftsperson adds a subtle spiral groove along the shaft. That isn't decoration. It acts as a screw thread, pulling the drill bit deeper into the material with less effort. It's a mechanical innovation born from the frustration of 1,000 hand-cramping hours. Another lineage shows in the chisels. Early models have a straight, thick blade. Later versions introduce a slight curve to the cutting edge. This curvature allowed for cleaner undercuts in wood carving, a more controlled removal of material. Each incremental tweak represents a solved problem, a piece of hard-won knowledge that was then standardized, passed on, and became the new normal. This inheritance of toolkits is deeply personal. Imagine a master craftsperson, their hands knowing the exact weight and balance of their favorite chasing hammer. When the time comes to train an apprentice, they don't just give instructions. They might pass on a tool, or commission a new one made to the exact same specification. In the debris, researchers found sets of tools that were nearly identical in form, but showed vastly different degrees of wear. One bone burnisher, used for polishing metal to a mirror shine, was worn down to a smooth, elegant curve, perfectly shaped by one person's lifelong grip. Beside it, in a later layer, was a nearly new burnisher of the same design, the copy of a legacy. The old tool wasn't thrown away. It was perhaps kept as a template, a physical memory of the correct form. This makes technology intensely human and continuous. When we look at a 2,000-year-old chisel with a curved blade, we are not just looking at a clever design. We are witnessing the preserved muscle memory of an ancient artisan. We are seeing the moment they realized a straight blade fought the material, but a curved one collaborated with it. That insight, frozen in bronze, was then felt in the hand of every apprentice who ever used that tool style. It connected them physically to the discovery. The typology of tools does more than track progress. It can trace cultural connections. A unique socketed axe head form found here might show up centuries later, hundreds of miles away. That isn't trade, it's migration. It's the movement of people carrying the shapes of their solutions with them. The tool becomes a cultural signature, as distinctive as a style of pottery or a burial rite. So the workshop floor offers a history written not in words, but in weight and wear. It tells of a silent collective intelligence, where progress was measured not in grand proclamations, but in the gradual refinement of the objects held in calloused hands. Each perfected curve, each clever groove was a gift to the future. A legacy of leverage and grace passed from one generation of makers to the next, right up to the moment the last furnace fire went cold. The crucible was a collaboration. That clay pot, the one that holds the molten bronze, it wasn't made by its fabric. That fine, heat-resistant clay came from a master potter, someone working in a different part of the city. That's the 18th thing we learn from the floor. No craft existed alone. They were all threads in a single tapestry. The waste tells this story. In the bronze casting debris, they found pieces of glass beads, beautifully made, but the blue colorant, its chemical signature, matched the dyes from a textile workshop nearby. So a glassmaker was getting materials from a dyer. In another corner, mixed in with carpentry tools, were bronze filings, tiny rivets. A woodworker's broken adze had been repaired right there, by the smith who worked there. This was an economy of shared expertise, a quiet trade in skill. Researchers use a term, the operational sequence. It means breaking down the steps of making something, and here every sequence intersected. To cast a bronze statue, you needed a master ceramicist first, someone who could mix a clay to withstand the heat, shape it into a perfect mold, fire it without cracking. The metalworker's art began with the potter's knowledge. A glazed vase required minerals from a miner, refined by a chemist, applied by a kiln specialist who understood temperatures. The chain wove the disciplines together. The floor is littered with these foreign materials. A pile of fine ivory shavings in the metalworking area, chips of rare ebony beside the pottery wheel. These weren't mistakes. They were transactions. An ivory carver likely left those shavings after fitting an inlay into a piece of jewelry made here. The ebony chips suggest a woodworker came to use the metal workshop's drills. Artisans moved between spaces, or their materials did, circulating in a network. The most eloquent proof is the composite object, a single artifact found nearby, a small wooden cosmetic box. The wood is acacia expertly joined, but its hinges and clasp are finely cast bronze, and set into its lid is a delicate inlay of ivory carved into a lotus pattern. One object, three distinct high-level skills: woodworking, metallurgy, ivory carving. No single artisan could have made this alone. It's a physical manifesto of collaboration. It required planning, trust, a shared understanding of measurements and aesthetics between separate workshops. The value of the box wasn't just in its materials, it was in the complexity of its social creation. This dismantles the idea of ancient crafts in isolated silos. The bronze smith wasn't competing with the potter. They were essential partners. A potter with poor crucible clay would ruin the smith's business. A smith who made weak tools would cripple the carpenter. Their reputations were mutually dependent, their livelihoods. This created an incentive for quality across the entire network. It fostered a culture where knowledge flowed. A new glazing technique discovered by a potter might inspire to try a new patina. A woodworker's trick for joining might be adapted by a bone carver. This collaborative ecosystem was the true incubator of innovation. Breakthroughs rarely happen in a vacuum. They happen at the intersections. When the person who knows clay talks to the person who knows fire and the person who knows metal. The workshop floor, with its mix of wastes, shows those conversations happened constantly. They were baked into the daily rhythm. The most beautiful and complex things their world produced were not the work of solitary genius. They were the signature of a community. Speaking to each other through the language of materials, they found a set of bronze chisels, all nearly the same. Their edges were worn down in the same pattern, as if they were used for one repetitive task day after day. They don't have the personal where you expect. No customized handles. No signs of a cherished tool. These are artifacts of an invisible workforce. And they force a question. The 19th question from the floor: who were the hands that did this work, and what was the nature of their freedom? Archaeologists who study ancient inequality are careful with this. The evidence is rarely a clear label. It's in patterns of disparity, written in the objects left behind. In a single workshop space, the quality of life varied starkly. In one area near the master's station, they found small personal luxuries: a finely carved bone comb, a few beads of imported glass, remains of meals with more meat and varied grains. A few steps away in a cramped, attached space with a separate, cruder entrance, the story changes. The floor is just hard-packed earth. The debris has only the most basic pottery. The food remains are sparse, dominated by a single grain. Personal possessions are absent. This spatial segregation within one economic unit is a powerful clue. It speaks to a social hierarchy built into the architecture of daily life. The human cost can be inferred from the skeletal record of the broader community, never seen directly. Studies of remains from common burial sites of the era show patterns of wear, advanced arthritis in specific joints, stress fractures in the shoulders and spine, injuries from a lifetime of repetitive, heavy labor. These are the physical signatures of a demanding craft economy. Researchers note that while such wear could affect any laborer, its prevalence and severity across a population can point to systems where rest and recovery were not a priority. A critical piece of evidence is the presence or absence of control. The workshop showed no defensive walls, no guard posts. Its main entrance opened onto a public lane. This suggests its workforce was not held by literal, visible chains within the space. Control may have been more subtle, more economic. Debt bondage, for instance, where a person worked to repay a loan that never seemed to diminish. That could create a workforce with little mobility but without overt physical restraint. The standardized toolkits, like those identical chisels, fit this model. They suggest workers who performed a specific, assigned task with tools provided for them, not chosen by them. A limitation on autonomy. Conversely, the evidence for high skill and innovation elsewhere in the workshop implies a level of engagement that often, though not always, aligns with some degree of personal investment. The trial pieces, the refined molds, the clever adaptations, these speak to a mind solving problems, not just a pair of hands following orders. This creates a complex picture. The same workshop that produced brilliant, customized artistry for a client could also rely on a tier of laborers performing monotonous, grueling tasks. It was likely a blended system. At the top, a master with apprentices bound by social contract and the pursuit of knowledge. And supporting that, a layer of laborers whose relationship to the work was defined by necessity, or obligation, or force. Grappling with this adds a moral dimension to the economic understanding. It reminds us that the beautiful fibula, the ingenious repaired tool, the thriving network, these were built not just on ingenuity and trust, but also on the foundation of someone's strenuous, perhaps unfree labor. The workshop's legacy is not one of pure egalitarian craft. It is a microcosm of its society, reflecting both the heights of human creativity and the depths of its social divisions. To understand the true cost of ancient goods, you have to listen to the silence around those simple, identical chisels, and acknowledge the full, complicated spectrum of hands that built the world from the ground up. A broken thing tells you something a perfect one never can. That's the 20th thing the floor tells us. The real treasure is in the waste pile. The cracked pots, the bronze castings that went wrong, the tiles that warped in the kiln. That's not just trash, it's data. Every failure is a moment frozen, a boundary being tested. It shows you where the old knowledge stopped and the unknown started. So materials engineers, they work with archaeologists. They don't just ask what an object is, they ask how it broke. They look at the fracture points under a microscope. The way a bronze blade snaps clean versus the way it crumbles. That tells you a story about the alloy. Was the tin too high, making it brittle? Was it cooled too fast, creating stresses the smith couldn't see but would find out in use? A cracked clay mold, the fracture line running right through a delicate pattern. That shows the potter's understanding of his material's limits. Did he add too much sand, making it weak? Or not enough so it couldn't take the shock of the molten metal? Every failure is a lesson. Ancient physics and chemistry, written in cracks and bubbles. The rate of failure across the layers, that's its own timeline. In stable times, production is calm. The reject pile is consistent, a predictable loss, but in other layers the story changes. You might see a sudden spike in miscast items, all from the same week. That could mean a rush. A big order came in, corners were cut, or a trusted supplier failed and they had to use worse materials. Or a layer full of strange, one-off malformed objects. That might mean experimentation. Someone trying a new alloy, a new mold shape, a higher kiln temperature. These failures aren't decline. They're a mind pushing forward, taking a short-term loss for a possible long-term gain. Take that batch of clay figurines, all found in one pit. 24 small goddess statuettes, each one beautifully detailed, and each one warped the same way. The left side slumped, the features blurred. A materials analyst can read that like a report. They were all on the same shelf in the kiln. That shelf was too close to the firebox. That day, the temperature on that side spiked. Went past what the clay could take. The potter learned a harsh lesson about kiln geography. That one event, captured in a pile of rejects, teaches us about daily problem solving. It wasn't theory about heat distribution. It was a practical, costly mistake, and it would inform every loading of that kiln from then on. This humanizes the ancient pursuit of perfection. We see them not as infallible masters, but as practitioners, in a constant, gritty dialogue with their materials. Every perfect fibula that left the workshop probably had a dozen malformed siblings that didn't. The craft was a negotiation, trial, error, adjustment. The floor's carpet of debris is the physical record of that. It shows quality wasn't an innate gift. It was a hard-won achievement, built on a foundation of learned mistakes. Every rejected piece before it was swept into the bin served its most vital purpose. It taught someone how to make the next one better. The floor is a calendar. Each layer of clay, each seam of ash is a page, but it's not a calendar of days. It's a master clock for a whole era. The workshop's stratified debris refines our timeline of history. The scientists who read the earth layer by layer, they see this place as a chronological anchor, a fixed point in time. From here we can date 100 other sites. The method is seriation. It tracks the evolution of style. Take the signature spiral catch fibula. In the deepest, oldest layers, the spiral is loose. A simple coil. In the middle layers it tightens, becomes more precise. In the youngest layers, just before abandonment, the spiral is tiny, almost a dot with extra decorative lines radiating out. That's a clear stylistic sequence. A visual timeline locked in the dirt. Now imagine an archaeologist 50 miles away. They find a bronze fibula in a burial. It has the tight, precise spiral from the workshop's middle period. Because they have the master sequence from the floor, they can date that burial more accurately. They can say this person lived when the workshop was in its peak production phase. The workshop's internal chronology becomes a ruler to measure the wider world. The science goes deeper with absolute dating. Charcoal from the furnaces is a time capsule. A thick layer from a major rebuild, maybe after a fire, they can sample that. Carbon-14 dating measures the decay of radioactive carbon in the wood. It gives a range of years, say between 1100 and 50 BCE, but that's a wide window. The workshop's own sequence sharpens the picture. That rebuild layer also contains the first appearance of a new, ornate mold style. So now wherever that mold style appears, we link it to that more precise moment. A powerful example is the arrival of a new alloy. In one distinct Suri layer, the bronze fragments suddenly show a consistent trace of arsenic. This isn't an accident. It's a deliberate recipe change, likely from a distant region. That same layer also contains a handful of pottery shards from Cyprus, the kind used to transport goods. By linking the new alloy to the foreign pottery in the same datable stratum, researchers can pin a moment of technological transfer to a specific phase of trade. It turns a layer of dirt into a historical event. This makes the workshop a foundational tool. Before, historians might have had a vague period called the Late Bronze Age collapse, spanning decades. But by correlating the workshop's layers, its moments of crisis, its shifts in material, with layers in other cities, they can build a synchronized timeline. They can see if the economic shock hit this city first or that one. They can track the wave of a disruption across the landscape, year by year, as it echoes in the debris of 100 similar floors. So this space, humming with practical activity, ends up gifting us something greater than objects. It gives us time itself, measured in the accumulation of its own dust. Each stratified failure and success becomes a tick of a clock that helps order the entire ancient world. The workshop was its own small world, but it wasn't closed off. You have to step back to see it, way back, to the whole ancient world from the Indus Valley to the Aegean, and on that map you draw lines. A line from this floor in southern Egypt to the tin mines in Afghanistan, another line to Nubia for ivory, and then a more delicate line for an idea, a way of riveting, a spiral pattern, moving from here to a port in Cyprus and beyond. This place wasn't isolated. It was a bright point in a much larger network, a humming constellation, what scholars call a world system. That framework sees connected zones, not separate civilizations. There were cores like the Egyptian royal court, and there were peripheries like this workshop city producing goods, but the influence wasn't just one way from the periphery to the core. It could run the other way too. A new alloy perfected here might travel up the chain, adopted by the king's own artisans. A local stylistic quirk could eventually shape elite fashion. So this workshop, though on the periphery, was a dynamic player. Its prosperity was a gauge. It mirrored the health of the whole system. You can read those shifts in the workshop's layers like a ledger. In strata from the height of Egyptian power, the debris is rich, lapis lazuli, ebony. Then in a layer from the late Bronze Age collapse, a time of fragmentation, those long-distance imports vanish. The workshop doesn't die, it contracts, it turns inward. It survives on recycled metal and imitations. Its fate was tied to the stability of empires and caravan routes thousands of miles away. Then in later layers, from a time of revived Mediterranean trade, new materials appear. Glass from Mesopotamia, pottery shapes from the Aegean. The workshop's recovery echoed the world's reconnection. That exchange is etched into the objects. Among the local amulets they found a few hybrids, a figurine of the Egyptian god Bes but cast in a pose and with features more common in Levantan art. It wasn't an import, it was a local interpretation. An imitation that shows contact, maybe a desire to cater to a cosmopolitan clientele or to adopt a foreign style. The most telling artifact for this connection was a single small scarab seal, carved from steatite, glazed a brilliant blue. Its underside had the cartouche of an Egyptian pharaoh. It was found not in a treasury, but in the workshop's own waste near a polishing station. It might have come as a trade good, a souvenir, or a model to copy. Its presence is a silent witness to a connection across deserts and seas. This changes how you see everything. The pile of bronze scrap, the failed casting, the personal token, they're not just local history, they're fragments of a global story. The tin in that failed alloy whispers of Afghan mountains. The style of a repaired fibula hints at a sailor's tale from the north. The workshop's economic resilience came from its connectedness. When one line on the map was cut by conflict or drought, the network could find another path. Another source, another idea. So the story of this one excavated floor expands. It fills an ocean. It shows that the ancient craftsperson in their focused labor was part of a conversation that circled the globe. Their anvil was a point where continents met. Their furnace heat was warmed by winds that had crossed deserts and sailed seas. To understand their local economy is to trace the lines on that vast, invisible map, and to hear how the pulse of a world system once beat in the rhythm of a single, busy hammer. The museum diorama used to be simple, just a line of figures anonymous hauling stones for a pyramid. The label called it labor in ancient Egypt. It was a scene of faceless toil. That supported the story of absolute royal power. Then the evidence from that one workshop floor started to circulate, and the diorama changed. The scene is different now. It shows a vibrant workspace covered. A master artisan is teaching an apprentice how to pour molten metal into a clay mold. In another corner, a merchant weighs tin on a small scale. The label doesn't just say labor anymore. It reads the craft economy, innovation from the ground up. That's the 23rd revelation. How a paradigm shift in archaeology ripples out. It reshapes museum displays, it rewrites textbooks, it changes how the public imagines the past. For curators, this was a challenge and an opportunity. The old story of kings and monuments is straightforward. It fits neatly into a gallery. But how do you display an economic network? How do you make something tangible that's as abstract as decentralized production or social capital? The answer came from the workshop itself. Museums began creating immersive replicas, not of thrones but of workbenches. You can walk into a reconstruction of that space at Atel. You smell the faint, earthy scent of clay and charcoal. You can lift a replica of the master's worn hammerstone, feel its weight, the smooth groove shaped by a lifetime of grip. Interactive screens let visitors trace the journey of tin from Afghanistan to this floor, or try a virtual puzzle, matching tokens to transactions. The goal, as one curator explained, is to move the visitor from passive observer to active participant. To help them understand that history wasn't just something that happened to people, it was something people made, with their hands and their choices, every single day. This shift demanded a rewrite of the stories told in classrooms. Textbook chapters once titled The Egyptian Economy now have headings like Diverse Economic Systems. The narrative doesn't begin and end with the palace treasury anymore. It weaves in the stories of independent workshops, merchant caravans, local markets. Students learn about the spiral catch fibula as a case study in branding, the recycling pits as an early model of sustainability. This bottom-up perspective makes the past feel more relatable, more human. It asks students to think like an ancient managing a supply chain, or an apprentice learning a trade that could support a family. History becomes less about memorizing dynasties, more about understanding the fundamental human drives for innovation, for community, for resilience. The impact reached a global audience through a documentary series on ancient engineering. One entire episode was devoted not to a pyramid or a temple, but to this unassuming workshop. The filmmakers used forensic animation to show the bronze casting process in detail, from shaping the beeswax model to the heart-stopping moment of the pour. They followed archaeologists analyzing microdebris, turning specks of dust into detective stories. The documentary personalized history. It gave viewers a protagonist, not a pharaoh, but a hypothetical master named. His name means appearing in Thebes, but his life was built right there on that workshop floor. For millions of viewers, the ancient world was suddenly populated not by remote gods and rulers, but by clever, problem-solving individuals they could recognize. Their work had dignity, intelligence, profound consequence. That's the ultimate legacy of a single excavation. It proves a discovery's power isn't confined to academic journals. It can redefine the artifacts behind glass, the chapters in a school book, the stories we watch on a screen. It changes our collective imagination. The past is no longer a monolithic landscape of monuments built by command. It's a bustling, interconnected marketplace of ideas. A living network where every traded token, every recycled scrap of metal, every perfected tool shape was a thread in the vast, vibrant tapestry of human civilization. And it all becomes visible from one patch of packed earth. Where the real work of history was done, the trowel had to be rethought. For a long time, the goal was the beautiful object, the intact vase, the golden seal, but this workshop floor, it was covered in industrial waste, a carpet of it, and that forced a revolution. It proved the most profound stories weren't in the museum pieces. They were in the dirt around them. This excavation didn't just uncover history. It changed how archaeology is done. It shifted the discipline from treasure hunting to a precise science of context. The key was new protocols, born from necessity. You couldn't just dig through that layer, the dense mix of slag and clay and metal droplets. You had to read it, like pages of a book. This led to what they now call microarchaeology. Instead of removing large sections of earth, the team worked in tiny squares, measured squares. They scraped the surface millimeter by millimeter, photographing every change in soil color, mapping every concentration of debris before anything was moved. Every bucket of soil was carefully dry sifted, then water sifted, to capture the smallest fragments, flecks of copper, grains of exotic stone dust, tiny seeds, insect remains. The floor itself became the most important artifact. And that demanded a new kind of team. The lone archaeologist with a brush was joined by a permanent squad of specialists. A geochemist arrived to take samples for soil chemistry analysis, reading the invisible traces in the phosphorus or copper content of the earth. A paleobotanist sifted for seeds and pollen to reconstruct the environment and diet. A materials scientist set up a portable X-ray scanner right in the trench. Able to determine the elemental composition of a metal fragment in seconds without damaging it, the workshop was a hub of ancient interdisciplinary craft. Now it required an interdisciplinary laboratory to understand it. The technology evolved to meet the challenge. One breakthrough was comprehensive three-dimensional modeling, using laser scanners and photogrammetry. They created a perfect digital twin of the entire excavated floor. This let them map the exact location of every single find, with sub-millimeter accuracy. From a large hammerstone down to a pinhead-sized droplet of bronze, they could replay the spatial relationships in a computer, testing theories about workflow and social organization in ways never before possible. They even scanned the microscopic wear patterns on tools, creating three-dimensional maps of the polish and striations to understand exactly how each tool was used and for how long. Perhaps the most enduring legacy is a formal waste typology. Before this, broken bits of crucibles and miscast metal blobs were often recorded simply as industrial debris. The team at this workshop pioneered a system to classify every type of waste by its material, its shape, and its likely point in the production process. A specific type of bubbled clay fragment became a diagnostic marker for a crucible that had overheated. A particular shape of bronze sprue indicated the use of a multi-cavity mold. This typology was published and shared. It became a universal reference manual. Now an archaeologist in Greece or Mesopotamia who finds similar waste can instantly recognize the echoes of a comparable craft economy, enabling global comparisons, deeper insights into the spread of technology. The ultimate revelation is meta. This one workshop taught archaeologists how to learn. It redefined what constitutes data, elevating the humble and broken to the center of the story. It made the scientific team standard on any serious dig. It turned excavation from a subtractive process, removing earth to find things, into a generative one, where the matrix itself is the source of endless questions and answers. The toolkit of the archaeologist was forever expanded, not with bigger shovels, but with finer sieves, sharper questions, and a profound respect for the quiet power of a single, well-studied patch of earth. The craft of understanding the past was itself remade. In the image of the meticulous, collaborative craft it sought to uncover, the master artisan never signed their work. We recognize their hand by the curve of a chisel mark, but the name is lost. That's the 25th thing we've learned from the floor. The workshop has taught us so much, and yet it's full of questions. Every puzzle we solve seems to open 3 more. And that's what keeps the research moving. The story isn't over. It's starting a new chapter, a more detailed one now. The project directors talk about the big unknowns, the social contracts. How were profits actually shared in that community? Was it a strict hierarchy, master and apprentice, or was it more cooperative, like a partnership? Did the town recognize the workshop legally, or was it just a family operation that got bigger? Archaeologists build models from fragments. One model suggests a family business, skills passed down. Another suggests a guild, senior craftspeople pooling resources. These aren't just academic, they're frameworks. They guide the next dig. Future work in the residential quarters could test it. Find houses of equal wealth together, that might mean a cooperative model. One house standing out, full of fine goods, might point to a single owning family. The tools for asking questions are changing fast too. Scientists plan to use advanced DNA analysis on residues, inside cracked crucibles on tool surfaces. It could tell us the exact organic materials. Is that dark stain beeswax for casting or tree resin for glue? They'll source the clay from the accounting tokens, trace it to specific local pits. That could map the workshop's economic ties to potters nearby. The goal is to move from what they did to the ingredients of their daily practice. Then there's the digital frontier. Teams are building a full virtual reality simulation from millimeter-accurate 3D scans. The aim isn't just to walk through a static model. They want to populate it. Virtual artisans, programmed with known workflows and material limits, they can run simulations. What if the charcoal delivery is 3 days late? How does workflow change if an apprentice gets hurt? This digital space lets historians stress test their theories about logistics and social resilience in ways the physical record can't. And then, some objects just don't make sense. In a corner of the floor they found a small stone cylinder, finely carved, grooved with mathematical precision. It's not a bead, It's not a tool handle, its purpose is a complete mystery. Was it part of some unknown measuring device, a ceremonial object, a toy? It sits in a museum case. A quiet challenge to anyone who claims we understand completely. It's a reminder. The past always holds something back. A single artifact can overturn a dozen assumptions. That's the cycle. Every answered question peels back a layer and reveals deeper, more intricate questions underneath. The workshop floor isn't a closed book. It's an opening line, a conversation across. Our tools get sharper, our questions get more nuanced, but the dialogue continues. The real legacy of this place isn't just the history it rewrote. It's the future of inquiry it inspires. The search for a name, the model of a partnership, the purpose of a strange stone cylinder. These are the threads that keep the story alive. They pull us forward into the next unknown. The principles from that floor aren't relics. They're blueprints for the challenges we have now. Look at our own world, fragile supply chains, vulnerable to one port closing or a conflict somewhere far away. That workshop survived for generations. Its economy was globally connected but also locally rooted. When the long-distance tin trade from Afghanistan faltered, they didn't collapse. They pivoted. They intensified recycling. They turned to local ores. They shifted production to what their immediate community needed most. That's in resilience. Our modern obsession is with hyper-efficient, just-in-time global networks, and that often sacrifices adaptability. The ancient model suggests a balance, a global web for ideas, for innovation, supported by a robust, flexible local network for essential production, for repair. It's a lesson in not putting all your economic eggs in one intercontinental basket. Then there's the fear of automation, the devaluation of skilled hands. The story from Atel argues the opposite. Their entire system was built on the irreplaceable value of human skill, judgment, creativity, the master's knowledge of alloys, the apprentice developing a touch, the collaborative problem-solving around a failed casting. That was their competitive advantage. It couldn't be automated away. Today, we debate the future of work. This ancient workshop reminds us that economies thrive when they cultivate deep mastery, craftsmanship. The modern equivalent isn't just the artisan woodworker. It's the software engineer designing elegant code, the technician maintaining complex machinery, the nurse exercising nuanced judgment. It's any role where human ingenuity, learned through practice and mentorship, creates value machines can't replicate. You can see the echo of their collaborative guilds in today's dynamic spaces. The tech startup hub, where programmers, designers, marketers cluster to share ideas and tools. That mirrors the ancient district where potters, carvers exchanged materials and techniques. The modern makerspace, the artisan cooperative. These are direct descendants. Ecosystems where reputation is currency, where innovation happens at the intersections of different skills, where community support provides a safety net. Proof that the most fertile ground for progress is often decentralized, trust-based, human-scaled. Economists who study resilient systems point to these traits. They note that top-down monolithic structures are brittle, they crack under pressure. But distributed networks like the one centered on that workshop they absorb shock, they can emerge stronger. The local adaptation, the shared knowledge pool, the social bonds that ensured mutual aid, these weren't just cultural features, they were critical economic infrastructure. In our pursuit of efficiency, we've stripped this infrastructure away, leaving our economic lives more productive, yet more vulnerable. Ultimately, the most timeless lesson is about the human spirit itself. The drive to make something well, to solve a tangible problem, to leave a mark of skill upon the world. This isn't a historical footnote, it's a fundamental need. The workshop floor shows us a society that organized itself to honor that need. It gave individuals a path to mastery, a place in a community, a direct line between their labor and their livelihood. In an age where many feel disconnected from the fruits of their work, this ancient model of integrated craft, where the spiritual, social, economic were woven together, feels not primitive, but profoundly advanced. The past in this light stops being a museum. It becomes a mirror. The decisions those ancient artisans made about sourcing, production, community, they were questions of values. Our globalized economy is the result of our own answers to those same questions. By studying their solutions, we aren't looking backward with nostalgia. We're gathering tools for building an economy that is not only prosperous and innovative, but also sustainable, resilient, and deeply human. The conversation that started around a bronze furnace thousands of years ago is one we're still having, and the wisdom from that floor is waiting for anyone willing to listen. We started with a single room, a room buried in time, a compact space. Its floor wasn't paved with gold, it was paved with the gritty residue of work, and from that floor, a whole new vision of antiquity has emerged. Ancient economies weren't the static top-down monoliths you read about. They were dynamic, they were decentralized, they were deeply human systems. Their true power wasn't held in a palace vault. It pulsed in the skilled hands in the shrewd negotiations of a merchant, in the quiet mentorship between a master and an apprentice. It lived in the trust of a sealed clay token, and in the resilience of a recycled bronze ingot. This one workshop, this microcosm, rewrote the narrative from the ground up. It debunked the myth of total royal control. It revealed a vibrant parallel economy driven by local demand and personal reputation. It mapped a global network. Threads of Afghan tin and Nubian ivory were woven right into its floor. It showed the intimate daily rhythm, meals shared, games played, knowledge passed between generations. It proved innovation wasn't a royal decree. It was a slow accumulation of small, practical insights, a better crucible shape, a clever tool design, born from the necessity of the work itself. The ultimate treasure unearthed here was never a glittering artifact. It was an understanding, a realization. These craft economies, humming with collaboration and ingenuity, were the true, beating heart of civilization. They were the resilient foundation upon which empires rose and fell. The palace might have built the monuments, but the workshop built the world that made the monuments possible. So it's a reminder to look closer, to value the fragments, the broken mold, the worn hammerstone, the pile of anonymous slag. It's in these quiet, overlooked pieces that the most complete and human stories are held. They whisper of a past built not by faceless labor but by individuals. Their names are lost, but their legacy is etched into the fabric of history. One deliberate strike, one careful pour, one trusted handshake at a time.